and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbeville. Alfred Whitey Birdwell was a Sherman tank driver in World War II's European theater after D-Day, but during the final push in the Battle of the Bulge and until victory in Europe. He was overseas just more than a year, but probably covered more miles per day served than just about anyone. He proudly recalls when he drove the first American tank over the Rhine River for the 3rd Armored Spearheads, a Purple Heart recipient. He drove a tank every day, except for those 10 days that he was laid up because of shrapnel wounds. Now 91 years old. His is another fascinating story of World War II service that we are honored to tell. So welcome Whitey Birdwell to Veterans of the Valley. Whitey, it is a pleasure to have you. I got to meet you back on May the 1st when we were honored to take the Lone Star Honor Flight trip to Washington, and that was a great trip that we've been able to review here on Veterans of the Valley. But we're here today to talk about your life and your service. You're a Texan. You grew up in Henderson.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Sort of take us through, from Henderson, and you worked for a while but couldn't find steady work. So you said the day after you got laid off from a job, you got drafted. Is that right?
All I had was just neighborhood work up until that time. And when the defense work started, we went down to Beaumont and went to work for Loomis Company, where we were making butadiene for the tires.
Right.
And we built that plant there, and we finished it up and the day that I finished my job, on the afternoon, then I got my draft card the next morning. So I went into Houston and they swore me in, and so I waited 6 weeks and I went down to Fort Sam, Houston, and they put me in uniform.
Well, you were married and had 2 kids at the time, and you were only making about $1.10 an hour at your job. So, so this was probably better for you to be in the Army. You went into the Army in March of '43, overseas to Europe, January the 1st, 1944, and a fascinating part of your family history is that you had 5 brothers and they all served in World War II.
Right.
All 6 of you, right?
Right.
Served in World War II. And 2 are, you and 1 other are still alive today, is that right?
I got 3 of us.
3 of you are still.
My brother just served in North Africa, and the one that was in the Navy, the baby brother.
Right.
Still living. As
we said in the opening, you were a tank driver. That's what you were trained to do. You drove lead tank for 1st Platoon, the 3rd Armored Division, and they're called the spearheads. Talk a little bit about the spearheads in that unit.
Well, our job was to go through the German lines and cut them in two and break their communications, and the other troops were to come behind and clean up, and that's what we did.
Right.
So that was they told us that when you get started, don't stop. Don't stop for anything, because it's just like a wave of water in front of a car. When you stop and it lashes back on you, it's hard to start again. So drive through. Just keep driving.
Just keep driving. Don't stop or you'll get stuck.
When you get them moving, move them.
I'm always fascinated by veterans who did serve in the European theater about how they got there, and you went aboard a converted luxury ship or passenger ship, the Queen Mary.
Oh, the Queen Mary, yes. That sure did.
Yeah.
And it was, I don't know how many troops was on it, but it was from wall to wall. And kind of hard to eat that limey cooking and drink the coffee and tea mixed together. we made it.
Somehow you did it. You left from Boston Harbor. And how long did it take you, a week?
So it took 6 days.
6
to
days?
land in England.
Right.
And on the 7th day, I was in Le Havre, France.
So you landed in England, you took the train down and actually took an LST across the channel.
Yes.
And landed in Le Havre, France.
Yes.
First you thought you were going to North Africa, is that right?
No, they said, in training.
In training,
But they didn't know how the war was moving, and so when they found out that North Africa was getting along just fine, then they decided to send us over to Germany and just hit the heart of the Germans there in Germany and help close the gate on them.
Right. Talk a little bit more about your mission and the service of your particular mission, because you were in Le Havre, France, and your job, like you said, was to cut through the German lines and just sort of disrupt things and band them together. Talk a little bit more specifically about that. Well, it's just like
plying a field. When you drive through, the Germans go this way.
Yes, sir.
And then we had the 4th Armored on one side of us, E Company on one side of us, and another company on the other side, and then we just kind of plowed them in together, and then the rear echelon would come along and pick them up and send them back to the prison camp.
Right. So they were the ones that were more in charge of taking them as prisoner.
Yes.
You were the one that sort of banded them together and said, march along.
Well,
right?
the only time that we took prisoners is when they gave up on the front line.
Right.
And we'd take their guns and their helmets and just send them back down the road.
Right. You said at the time that you did encounter resistance.
Oh, yeah.
But,
oh, yeah.
but those who wanted to surrender,
Gave up.
they gave up. They weren't ready. They didn't want war anymore themselves.
Home guards.
Yeah.
With people who were scripted in the Army as home guards.
Right.
And the roughest one that we faced was the Hitler's Youth and the SS.
Right.
That was the rough ones.
Right. Right. Those are the ones that you had to give resistance back to.
Back to, yeah.
Right. Right. Because of, right. Talk about, you talked about your tank and how you would sort of camouflage your tank to keep the Germans from knowing exactly who you all were. You had a little bit of a unique way of doing that.
I don't know, we didn't do that so much as some of the other guys did who were in the holding position.
Right.
If we was moving, we didn't have time to do that. We just had the regular Army color on it.
Right, but you had
The
a
only-
piece of steel.
The only time, well, I had a piece of steel on the front of it.
Right, that's what I meant. Yeah, that's what I was talking
When
about.
I got into the steel mill in Germany, I saw this piece of soft metal steel there. And it was pretty thick, and I asked the sergeant, I said, can you put that on the front of my tank to cover up that star? He called the vehicle over there and picked it up and welded it on the front of the tank. My tank run like a mad wash with a tail up in there with that heavy piece of metal on the front.
Right, right,
But it really did the job because I had a lot of gouges in it.
right.
So
Now, as a tank, you drove the tank. There were 5 in each tank, right?
5 in each tank.
Right. And you said that your entire brigade or your unit had about the firepower of 17 tanks, right?
Well, yes, because we had 5 tanks online, and we had the Air Force observer and the artillery observer in the tank, so we had the 2 extra tanks.
Right,
Had 17 of firepower.
right. You are a receiver of the Purple Heart.
Yes.
You did earn the Purple Heart, I guess, if that's the word for it. I guess it's not something that people strive for, but talk about the circumstances of how you were wounded, because you were trying to help a fellow soldier.
Well, they were sent up on the hill to observe. And we got up there, we didn't see anything, of course. Of course, we took our field glasses and looked around. And the assistant driver got out to throw hay on the tank to camouflage it. And that's when the mortar fire started coming in and cut his arm off. And so he was just in limbo out there, not knowing, just crazy. When you get hit that way, I don't know how, well, I don't know how you feel. I don't know how to explain it, except he was just out there in la-la land with
Right.
suffering.
Right.
So I jumped out of the tank and helped him in the foxhole there. So the mortar fire kept coming in and would hit on the side, and the ground was shaking. I thought, well, the next one's going to be in here on top of us and get both of us. So if I can get out and let them follow me, it would save him. But when I jumped out, I foot slipped on a bunch of hay, and I laid there, and that's when the mortar fire hit me. And I tell everybody, I said, well, you know which way I was going when I got shot, because where I got shot. But it just got me started, and I got out of there.
129 pieces of shrapnel they took out of you, right?
Put it in a little deal like that, and I lost it somewhere.
Yeah.
My souvenir.
But you were able to get up and
Oh, yeah.
and go to safety.
Yeah, it didn't
though,
cripple
right?
me. It didn't cripple me. They just sent me to the hospital for infection.
Right.
And to get the shrapnel out that was there.
Right, right.
So they dug it out and popped it out and give me penicillin, and I was all right after that.
And you understand that the soldier that you were trying to help, he was sent off to England, I guess.
Yeah, he was
To
sent
a
off to
hospital,
England
but-
and somewhere else. I never heard
But
of
he
him.
survived his wound, as
Oh,
far
yes.
as you know, but you never heard any more
never
from
heard
him.
more about him at all.
Right. Well, he probably remembers the guy that jumped in the foxhole with him. I'm sure if he's alive today, I'm sure he remembers that
They
fellow.
called me Tex, so I remember.
After the hospital, now you were sent back to work. You were in the hospital for 9 to 10 days. And talk about after you were in the hospital, you You wanted to go back to the front lines, is that
I
right?
did go back to the front line. The
Yeah.
safest place there was the front line.
Exactly.
So I went back, and they was in Cologne, and that's where I was wounded, on the Cologne plains, and they were in Cologne waiting for the bridge to be built across the river to jump off again.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back and got my old tank and drove the first one across the Rhine River.
Talk about that. That's quite significant, I think. It was the first tank to drive. It was over a pontoon bridge.
Well,
Right,
those
over the Rhine
pontoons-
River.
Those pontoons were huge, and my brother-in-law was there. I happened to get a glimpse of him, but I didn't get to talk to him because he was too busy. They just come and put up the bridge and took off. They were huge pontoons, and they tied them off on each side of that river because it was real swift.
Mm-hmm.
And then they tied them together with steel with pins in them.
Right.
Then they laid the track across them where it would work. And when I looked at that thing, I said, well, I don't know. I'm going to leave my hatch off in case I go down. I can get out of this tank.
Right.
But they were good. The Army supplied them real good. And so it would just go down and up, down and up. So we had to take our time of going across them and not really rush, but just go with the flow.
Right.
And so we all, trucks and all, made it across. We were good.
Right. It was Whitey Birdwell's unit, as a matter of fact, that as we read, that fired one of the first shells into Germany of the war. And the 110-mile march. Now
We went back for,
you went with those people, right?
we went back, it was our time to go back for rest and maintenance on our
Mm-hmm.
tanks.
Right.
And we was back a half a day when they told us we had to jump off because the 104th Infantry Division the Germans had give way and they followed them up.
Right.
And they said, well, we got 110 miles to go before nightfall
Right.
to catch them. So we made it up to within about, I guess, about 15 miles of the town. And when the Germans shot the third tank driver's head off with a bazooka. And so that kind of disrupted the march. But they just got together and decided, well, we got to have somebody in town to let the Germans know that we've arrived. And the diesel tank didn't have any exhaust flash from it, where the regular tanks did. They burnt 90 octane gas, and it was a huge flame coming out of the exhaust pipe. So then I did the night duty anyway because they couldn't pick me up other than sound.
Mm-hmm.
So I followed the tank sergeant into town with a luminous button on his belt.
Right.
And I just had to stay so close to him. And we got into that town, and I don't know how much further I could have went, but I don't think very far because 110 miles on a tank of diesel is a long way.
Right. And you're pretty much out of ammunition,
Pretty
right?
well out of ammunition and all that stuff. We couldn't have fought a very good battle with what we had left.
Right.
But anyway, the Germans heard us come in, and they started moving out.
Mm-hmm.
So that was.
They didn't know you were out of ammunition. They
No,
just
they
knew you were there.
didn't. And I wasn't going to tell
You
them.
weren't going to tell them. So your job sort of switched. Your job was to support the infantry, but
Well, that was
they
our
were taking
main
care-
job all
yeah,
the way through, was
yeah.
to support the infantry.
that's right.
And
And
they
but in
protected
this
us.
strategy, they were taking care of you.
That's
too.
right, they
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
Did a good job, too. The 104th said, bragged that they never lost a tank, and they didn't.
Right.
And they were right there with us.
And you're glad because you're one of the tanks they didn't
One of
lose.
the tanks that-
Talk about how I've always been fascinated to ask people, you know, as a 22, 23-year-old kid from Henderson, Texas, just how did you feel having made the transition from being just a young Texas kid into warfare? I mean, you had to rely and trust on your training an awful lot,
Well-
right? Were you scared?
To start with, I was scared to death.
Yes, sir.
But you automatically do what they train you to do, regardless. Something has to kick in. So the training did. But I wasn't so fearful after I kind of got used to what was going on,
Right.
because I was busy taking care of ourselves, you know, in the battle and what have you, and listening to the orders that, of course, your captain always tried to take care of you anyway. But he was back observing what was going on. So when you don't realize when you're in basic training how much the safety of it kicks in until you're there.
Right.
But it just automatically kicks in and you do the things that you need to do to preserve yourself.
You were in Europe for the better part, almost the entire part of the year of 1944, which is,
yes.
you know, arguably the most significant year of the war as far as the European theater is concerned.
Yes.
You were during this. You were in this move through Germany when D-Day occurred in June of 1944. You were there. Were you all getting any news or anything like that that there was an invasion in Normandy, that the decision had been made to make the final push and to defeat Hitler by making this final push? Were you all aware of sort of what was happening in the war rooms?
Well, we knew when Hitler killed himself.
Right.
And we were more or less brought up through, not by news, but by word of mouth from here to there, and the little paper that they gave us.
Right.
And so we kind of kept up on that all the way through.
Right.
And we knew where the different units were because it was reported in the Stars and Stripes
Exactly.
to let us know that we did have company over there.
Right. Yeah.
And so that gave us assurance and helped us out a whole lot.
Winter of 1944-45, that was in the Battle of the Bulge.
Battle of the Bulge.
And you know, whenever I talk to anybody who served in the Battle of the Bulge, they talk about the weather. They talk about the cold. How do you describe it?
Well, if you was at the North Pole, you would know it was terrific, I'll tell you that. We had our tanks hid in the snow.
Is that right?
And, well, I don't know other than to say that we just had 6 foot of snow, and you couldn't touch the tank with a bare hand. Your hand would stick to it.
Right.
And I don't know how we made out, but we did. We lived through it without, we didn't have any casualties there. We knocked out one German tank that come through, lumbering through, and the first guy that was a tank sergeant, called him Porky. He said, "No, we're not going to do this. We're going to wait till he gets further down the line and we'll have more support."
Right.
But when he come down there, we put a white phosphorus on him, and they come out like black washed off her nest. So we didn't have any trouble with them. Just knocked the tank out, it burned.
Right. Got 3 images I want to show you. Whitey Birdwell, this is your patch, which you have actually on the hat that you're wearing today too. This is a close-up of it, of the 3rd Armored Division spearhead. That's the insignia. This is something that I came across, that I found. It's a sketch, actually. And that is Major General Rose in the top of that tank. And he was actually, this is a depiction of the time that, through a misunderstanding, that he was actually killed at this time. And this was a depiction, actually, of the moments just prior to his murder. And you speak of Major General Rose, and that's sort of a look of what the kind of tank that you had and that you were driving. And you say not many generals rode in tanks, right?
That's right. They didn't. Well, there wasn't any many generals on the line.
Exactly.
Because they were back in the directing the army and keeping up with casualties and all this stuff. And they gave the orders, the marching orders and this kind of thing, but they had a tremendous job to do to take care of everything other than just being on line.
Right. There's another sketch in the back end of a Sherman tank.
Yeah.
Of the type of tank that Whitey Birdwell piloted. And some of the terrain was quite interesting, I guess, right? You getting stuck in the mud and...
Well, we were driving, and we had some anti-aircraft guns up on the hill, and we wanted to dodge those, so we got down low going up by a valley, and of course I got in the quicksand and I went down.
Right.
So I had to stay there that night and suffer that anti-air attack fire for 2 or 3 hours, and some of the infantry got hurt.
Right.
We were sunk down deep enough that the water was coming in our tank.
Tell me the story that you were telling me before we started today, a story that you forgot to tell me the other day.
Oh,
you were talking about.
After we carried our infantry up the Rhine River where we met the Russians.
Right.
We went back to a little town called Sugartown. It was Zuckerstadt. And that's what they call their villages, were Stotts. And so we carried them up there, and we was back, of course, in the holding position, and we thought everything was over with and clear back there. But one morning, I think about 3 days after we carried our infantry up, the Germans come in on us.
Right.
And I was in the tank at the time, but the captain's driver come running up and said, "The Germans is in town." So I said, "Well, go wake the guys up, knock on the door and holler help or something and just get them out here." And I said, "I'll take my rifle and play infantry."
Mm-hmm.
The graveyard was right across the street, and so I said, "You can drive my tank and I'll be out there to try to keep them off of you." So I got out there and fired one shot and my rifle lodged. So I was sitting out there in the graveyard, they kicking up dirt around me. But anyway, it turned out real good.
Yeah, because you're here talking to me.
I'm here talking to you. They came by, and I didn't know where the Germans were located. I knew that they were around that graveyard.
Right.
So when they, of course, they didn't come through the graveyard with my tank, and I didn't go across the fence. But anyway, they got down a ways, and they decided, well, we better come back. And so they come back firing the machine gun over me, and I got over the fence and
Yep.
followed the tank out. So everything turned out real good. It lasted about 3 or 4 hours, and we got them all cleaned out.
When the war in Europe ended, you came back into holding patterns, came back through a rest camp, and sort of talk about what you did. A lot of the soldiers and the military people were told immediately, well, we're going to put you on boats and we're going to go over to Japan because we're going to fight a ground war there. But that was not part of your mission. Talk about what your mission was.
Our mission was just to set up military government to clean the towns up, pick up the arms and ammunition that was left over, and kind of establish a pattern of government for them. And so we came back from up there to an SS rest camp by, I don't know where it was really.
Right.
But anyway, it was a nice log encampment there, and we stayed there 3 days and nights and got everything ready. And we drove back to Moorfield by Frankfurt on the Rhine and stayed there several weeks till we got the town cleaned up. And then the military government took over, and when they'd take over, we'd move out to another town and clean it up and let the military come in. And we wound up, the last place we was at was down in Swabish Hall down in southern Germany.
Right.
And that's where we broke up, and they put us on the cattle cars and carried us to up to the North Sea and put us on the boat and brought us home after they'd made up a load.
January 12, 1945, so you were overseas just over a year. And you said you went, probably in a year's time, you probably traveled about as far
as anybody.
As anybody possibly could in 1 year's time.
All the way, well, I didn't go through, of course I was lucky, I didn't go through North Africa, I didn't come through Italy.
Right.
But I went all the way through France, Belgium, and Germany.
Exactly. And you came home, you had almost, they tried to leave you, right? When you were coming home, they told you they were going to...
Well, we got back into...
You outsmarted them, yeah.
We went down to Pittsburgh. We tried to see everything we could see while we was on that trip, because we didn't figure that we would ever have an opportunity to go back. So we went down to Pittsburgh and got back into camp that they'd already shipped out, so we just grabbed our bags and got on the train that was coming to Texas.
Yep.
It's the only time I could talk back to a colonel.
But you ended up getting back before the rest of them, right?
Did. I sure did. Got my discharge before the rest of the Texas board did.
Yeah, they made room in the aisles for you to get home. You came home, you tried to get work, and I looked this up because you made reference to it, that you joined the 5220 Club.
Yeah.
And I found out what that was, and it says at the time veterans were eligible to collect unemployment benefits for a period of 1 year. The amount paid was $20 a week for 52 weeks, hence the 5220 Club. At that time, $20 a week was a fairish amount of money, and that would roughly equate to about $400 a week in today's dollars. That would be about pay for that. But it was rough finding work.
There wasn't any.
Coming back, there wasn't any.
Wasn't any work.
So you were a 5220 guy.
Right.
But eventually you did work, and talk sort of about what your career, I know you were in trucking, refinery business.
Well, I started out driving a truck, and that was a low-paying job, but it was better than a farmhand.
Right.
And so I just went from there to construction work.
Mm-hmm.
And when they time began to change, and of course the refineries were trying to build themselves up, you know, into repair. Ford Bacon Davis had a job going in the carbide, and so I took off down to Texas City and went to work for Ford Bacon Davis.
Right.
And I stayed down there for a number of years and worked construction work. And I worked there and Freeport, Galveston, Houston, then went to Chicago and worked there, and I worked Port Arthur, and wherever the work was, that's where
Now,
I
whose
worked.
house did you live in Chicago?
Paul Harvey's house.
Paul Harvey's house. He actually owned the house that you leased,
He
right?
owned the house that I leased.
So he was your landlord, was Paul
Well,
Harvey.
He was in California at the time.
And that's the rest of the story there. Yeah. So he was in California at the time. That's right. You even talked about one time you actually lost a job indirectly because of Watergate.
Well, I was in Phoenix working for Martin Construction.
Uh-huh.
And the Martin,
He was part of the Richard Nixon
well, one from
story.
California was,
Right.
I think he was a representative of some
Right.
kind, senator, and he was mixed up in the Watergate, but he had previously bought in with the Martins of Phoenix.
Right.
And so when this Watergate broke, well, we went out to job that morning. They said, "Clean up, boys, we're through. We got to be out of here in 8 hours."
That's a tough way to lose a job. We're just about out of time, Whitey, and I want to thank you. Your first wife, Edith, died of cancer, and you all had lost a child, but you had 6 children, and you married Patsy in 1965, and she had 5 children, and together 11. And thank you for being with us. We appreciate it, and thank you for your service.
I lived in a wonderful world of women.
Lucky you. Whitey Birdwell and his wife Patsy were married in 1965, and between them 11 children, 18 grandkids, and 31 great-grandkids. And all can be justly proud of Whitey's service to our country. We salute him as we do all veterans. I'm Tom Turbeville. Join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.